Hello and welcome back to Everything is Ideology. I'm your host, Dr. Lee Kaplan. Today we are joined by Dr. Steve Lamos, Associate Professor of Writing and Rhetoric in the English Department at the University of Colorado Boulder. His work explores race, labor, and pedagogy in the U.S. writing programs alongside innovative approaches to literacy, sound, and embodiment. In today's episode, we dive into his recently published work, Writing with Emo Nostalgia, toward musical mattering, where we explore how nostalgia functions not just as a backward glance, but as a way of imagining alternative futures. We'll talk about emo beyond its stereotypes, less as individualistic angst and more as a site of community, affect, and critical engagement. We'll also unpack concepts like writing with music, critical punk orientations, and the unexpected afterlives of cultural production in digital and sonic spaces. At the center of this discussion is the concept of nostalgia, not as passive longing or sentimental reflection, but as something active, something that shapes how we make meaning in the present and how we move toward the future. We unpack how nostalgia operates psychologically, culturally, and pedagogically, and why it might matter more than we think. We also dig into the idea of writing with music, a challenge to traditional academic thinking that separates mind and body, subject and object. Instead, this approach asks what happens when we treat music as something lived, embodied, and co-constructed, where writing becomes less about analysis and more about participation, sensation, and ultimately transformation. Along the way, we touch on emo's shifting aesthetics, questions of gender, race, and inclusion, and the strange ways cultural forms circulate through scenes, technology, and generations, often taking on new meanings far beyond their original context. This is a conversation about how culture moves, how it lingers, and how it continues to shape us, even when we think we've left it behind. If you like what we do here, please subscribe and support the show on patreon.com/everythingisideology or follow us on instagram.com/everythingisideology. Welcome back, everyone, to Everything is Ideology. I have the pleasure of being joined by Dr. Steve Lamos, who is an associate professor in the program for writing and rhetoric in the English department. His work focuses on issues of race and racism within U.S. college-level writing instruction, particularly in the context of basic writing programs, on issues of teaching track labor in contemporary U.S. writing programs, and on novel forms of literate becoming at the intersection of the sonic and the alphabetic, which I appreciated you using the term alphabetic throughout the piece rather than discursive. I thought it was
Thank you.
actually a nice touch. I noticed that.
Thank
Um,
you.
Lamos' published work includes the book Interest and Opportunities, Race, Racism, and University Writing Instruction in the Post-Civil Rights Era. Winner of a 2013 Special Commendation from the Conference on College Composition and Communication Outstanding Book Award Committee, the essay toward job security for teaching track composition faculty, recognizing and rewarding affective labor in space, which won the 2016 Richard Oakman Prize for Outstanding Essay in College English, and a range of pieces in college composition and communication, college English, Journal of Basic Writing, Writing Program Administration, Composition Studies, and several edited collections. Dr. Lamos's current book project is tentatively titled Resonant Rhythms, Drumming, Writing, and Professional Literate Life. It explores intersection between his academic work and his work as the drummer and trumpet player for the indie emo band American Football. And American Football is routinely included among the most influential emo artists of all time by Rolling Stone, The Guardian, Pitchfork, NPR, and many others. So absolute pleasure to have you here, and wonderful to sort of also have another sort of musician dollar kind of guy doing a bunch of different stuff, speaking to different audiences, and having to engage with sort of like different metaphors to help different audiences understand stuff and whatnot. And I also just got done teaching a writing and composition course, so it's
Oh, I
very
wanna
much
hear
on my
about it.
mind.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome.
Sure, we could.
Thank you so much for having me. This is, really, really flattering. I'm truly, honored to be here. Thanks.
Of course, I actually already have my students reading this piece we're going to be discussing for
Cool,
Monday as well. So,
cool.
okay, so you wrote this wonderful piece called "Writing with Emo Nostalgia" toward musical mattering, and I found it really interesting for several different reasons. Right, it offers a lot of composition and rhetoric scholarship, is sort of a pedagogical sort of or meta-pedagogical kind of work insofar as it not only lays out research, but also ways in which teaching can happen. And that necessarily doesn't happen too much where the scholarship informs the teaching and the practice and so on. So I definitely always really appreciate articles that help me sort of teach and think about things and whatnot. But sort of theoretically, I guess we're also going to dig into this emo nostalgia business. And I found this particularly interesting because generally speaking, the sort of like cliche with emo and nostalgia, or especially really emo, is like, I don't know, being individualistic and crying or whatever have you may be, that sort of thing. But here, you're actually not even talking about emo as sort of like just this sad individualistic enterprise with black painted nail polish and I don't know, tight pants or whatever. You're actually looking at it a way as sort of creating different aspects and forms of community and imagining alternative futures. Which is also an interesting use of emo and nostalgia. Um, so first, before we get things started, I guess, would you mind telling us what these three milestones in the piece you lay out? Because that's a great way of getting into the biographical information of yourself, the piece, and also further lay out our kind of conversation.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm getting the wrong 3 milestones. I'm also working on a talk based on this paper for next week, so, I hope I'm getting these right. In the last couple of years, I've been part of this band, American Football, on and off for almost 30 years, and so in the last 2 years, we've celebrated the 25th anniversary of our first record together. We've celebrated the 10th anniversary of reforming as a band. So we introduced a record in 1999, essentially disappeared entirely for 15 years, and returned in 2014. And then the third milestone, I celebrated 20 years on this campus, but that's also coupled with 30 years in rhetoric and composition. So I came to this term nostalgia in a very kind of like uh, everyday parlance, like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of milestones I'm thinking back, and since writing this piece a little bit, I've had to try to come to basic terms with academic definitions for nostalgia, and a lot of them come from psychology. Nostalgia is this sort of melancholic, wistful looking back at past events, whether real or imagined. And imagined nostalgia is quite interesting, especially when we start talking about students and maybe nostalgia for times that students haven't lived through, or maybe times we haven't lived through. But it's with a focus on sort of present and future action, a kind of mitigating unease or dealing with sort of discomfort in a present through a sort of looking back. And I do think part of what I have to talk about for this keynote later in the week, I'm giving a keynote at the first emo conference of its kind in musicology. Um, trying to figure out why emo is potentially a really interesting space to look at this. I think the aesthetics of emo are pretty are to have one's heart on one's sleeve, to focus on affect, to be okay with affect as it transforms into emotion as sort of ways of being, or even aesthetic choices. You were joking about, sort of tight pants and certain ways of comporting in the world. It seems to me that emo and nostalgia work together aesthetically, but also there's some interesting things to be done intellectually by thinking about what emo or what nostalgia does, especially in an emo context. So I hope those are the right 3 milestones. They're the ones that have been most of my wife and I have also been together. We met right before all this started with the band and my PhD and everything else. So she and I have been together for around 30 years. So middle age is full of thank you, nostalgic milestones. In all the ways, nostalgia can be this. There's a joke. I thought it was a Midwestern joke, but it might be a more widespread. Nostalgia is a mild form of depression. And I think that's the kind of negative valence of this. If you just sort of sit with a past as a somehow a better alternative to the present. But I think this work in psychology that I've been trying to understand, and then part of the point of this project really was to sort of say, nostalgia can be useful, but the point is to sit in the present and to move toward the future. So I hope that answers that question.
No, that's great, and I know a lot of emo scholarship that I've seen, and it's so much fun saying emo scholarship
It
'cause
is fun. Yeah.
I was one of these guys, going to the sort of mall, and it was like the original kind of like, it was like a runway show going to the mall and showing off whether or not you could straighten your hair and whatnot. Now, you mentioned, the tight pants aspect and all of these things, and the aesthetics are very sort of queered as well, and there's always been elements of, like, rock and roll history and sort of queerness, and obviously race and gender and whatnot. A lot of the emo sort of stuff is about, like, gender and power dynamics. Like I found different articles on like the creation of like beta alpha male stuff. You've
Yes.
probably seen that paper as well. Um, so I guess we'll maybe talk about it a little bit, but I was just curious if you could tell us about your particular flavor and brand of emo music because you're coming out of a even maybe creating a particular tradition in different ways? Or I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the Midwest emo thing, what that even means, et cetera, et cetera.
The if I would describe the kind of emo that you were just talking about as this sort of I've heard it described as third wave. And you're we're breaking up on each other. Are we good? Okay. Yeah, you've gone fuzzy on me, but we're good. I'll keep talking and we'll see how it goes. Um the aesthetic you described, I've heard is described as sort of third wave, like the 2000, the aughts emo stuff. This band was part we were we called it emo, but a little bit sort of like, oh, that was a little bit of a term of derision, like you weren't punk rock enough. And so it was this interesting moment, and you were talking about this beta male thing. There was this sort of engagement with a kind of masculine, aggressive rock or something. And I think part of our interest back then was not in that, was in doing something different. And so post rock and jazz and Sea and Cake, but also the Sundays, there were other bands with it with a sort of a different kind of softer aesthetic that I think we were actively trying to sort of say, we love kind of harder and more aggressive music, but we don't want to do that. And then I would say that that morphed into what you were describing a moment ago, that this kind of third wave, and there's a particular kind of aesthetic and a particular kind of queering of presentation among, say, male performers. But it was it second wave and third wave. You've read the Jess Hopper piece, emo where the boys aren't, like that was a thing in our world. I think it was a thing in the third wave world too. What I like now about the aesthetic is I think it's much more openly inviting of different people. Gender and sexuality and fluidity are, I think, are more sort of central to the aesthetic. I would hope that the genre has become more inclusive of people from different races, from different cultures, from different language groups. So I want to say that emo has become more uh, inclusive. I hope so. One of the papers I'm going to be referencing quickly is by Williams and Sobande, and I'm forgetting the exact title of it, but they have a great recent piece. I think it's in European Journal of Cultural Studies about sort of whiteness and emo nostalgia and calling for a sort of careful, critique of the idea that these things were somehow uh, egalitarian back in the day, or that we hearken back to this thing and not take seriously the idea that this was a sort of whiteness was sort of primary, suburbanness was sort of primary, these sorts of things.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, yeah, the suburbanness, the sort of teenage angst and whatnot, these speak to very particular sort of white suburban kind of social conditions and the alienation of like the early aughts as a result of like neoliberalism and whatnot in the 70s. And like, heavy metal has a lot of these discourses intertwined within it, but it doesn't explain it in totality, like what's going on, just that sort of thing. Um, there was, one thing that I found, sort of really interesting that I think you kind of touched on, and I think you touched on it just now, and it's this idea of a sort of critical orientation to it, this critical punkness.
Yeah.
Um, so would you mind describing sort of what you meant by this critical punk thing? Because it sounds like it could work as a sort of framework for understanding in different ways.
I might have been giving us too much credit too, or trying to taking a lens from today and maybe giving us too much credit. But I guess I autobiographically, I think as a white kid growing up in the Chicago suburbs, a white cis hetero kid growing up in the Chicago suburbs, I was routinely confronted by otherness in terms of political views, social views through punk music. When I would get educations, people would ask me questions about where I'm from or my assumptions about who I am and sort of what's right and wrong or what's normal and abnormal. It would come in the context of punk music and or me being absolutely enamored with the music of Miles Davis and then reading Miles's biographies and autobiographies and asking questions like how can this artist be treated this way? What am I not understanding about my place in the United States culture where I don't even understand how Miles could get beat up in front of the club, right? That's in that famous moment where the cops beating the hell out of him underneath his marquee. So between critical punk, I would say, was just sort of being confronted with folks who held views different than mine, and then coupled with this sort of what ended up being critical jazz studies because I was just so deeply attracted to this music and couldn't make sense out of like why am I not? You're right. Are my social conditions as sort of a white suburban kid different from Miles's somehow? Like I was asking myself these questions at 14, 15 years old. Um, I think that's about as far as I've theorized critical punk and or it does tie into the framework here though, and part of what Dylan Robinson has to say. To write with music is to try and feel through use alphabetic writing as a tool to feel differently, to sort of place one's self and one's experience at the center of this unfolding thing. And um, I think that's a deeply critical orientation. That forces you into a different kind of embodiment. It forces you to ask fundamental questions about what you think you feel and why and sense and understand. Robinson speaks of that as being queering on the one sense, and he's deeply interested in haptic criticism, the sort of over the top criticism that uses incredibly flowery and exciting and interesting language to make something like its own art form. He couples that with discussions of indigenous ontology. To write with is also to recognize that as a number of indigenous cultures do, that animate and inanimate things influence each other in profoundly important ways, and the writing with and the embodiment that reveals puts us in touch with these things. So I'm fascinated by what he has to say. This queers normal ways of understanding things, including music, right? It's not about music, and now we're talking about Christopher Small or somebody. It's not about music as a noun or Beethoven scores or something. It's like this overwhelming feeling, like the body without organs kind of thing. And then we get this whole other sort of ontology. And I think Robinson is, and then there's some folks in my field who are interested in this too, talking about new materialism and sort of saying, no, these new material ideas aren't that new, that there's a whole sort of alternative history of exactly this sort of thing, if you look for it. So I opened lots of cans of worms right there, I suppose, but somewhere in there was me sort of trying to say something about learning from punks and then learning from jazz history.
No, that's great. Hardly a can of worms. And if not, it was a very neatly contained can of worms. you know. So yeah, I mean, there's a ton of different directions here, and the Robinson piece is also thinking through sort of, as you said, different animate, inanimate, and animate sort of relations. And what's interesting, just putting on the sort of ethnomusicology hat, is also indigenous forms of sort of what's called, I guess, organology. Organology is like the study and the classification of different instruments and stuff like this, like aerophones and membranophones and all of these sorts of things. And it's, there's no particular good categories within these sort of Eurocentric frameworks because they're in relationship and in dialogue with their instruments. We name our instruments generally speaking, like, famously BB King with Lucille or something. Like, what does it mean? It's no longer a chordophone, your guitar. It's now like an extension of your body. It's something you do things with. It's something you can't live without. So it's like these various categories within sort of musical settings like membranophone, aerophone. It's like, what does that even mean? This is Lucille, man. Like this is my friend. This is my guitar. I couldn't be without it. This is my therapy, you know. Um, So I think it's great because you kind of touched on your project a little bit. Would you mind talking about what you mean by writing with music instead of writing about, and how that kind of splits things up in a way that kind of separates the person and the music? Something like this?
Yeah, yeah, Robinson, and to me, this is the crux of his argument as I understand it, and then I try to turn around and use it. And I would love to meet him sometime and see whether I'm right or whether I'm missing something. But to the degree that I understand his project, writing is this sort of Cartesian mind body split stuff, right? I am separate from the musical object, the music and its nounness. It exists as its own sort of thing, and I am this disinterested person who can objectively engage with it, right? Analyze it, dissect it, all of these sort of Western notions. To write with is to take almost the opposite approach. Music is a verb now rather than a noun. Music is a process. The body, another guy that I reference in this piece quickly, Thomas Brett, who I think identifies as a musicologist and also as a hell of a vibraphone player. Um, to write with is to um, engage the body in that process. And Brett says the body completes the circuit of meaning, right? It's like I'm a skier. I'm not a good one, but I love it. Skis sit dormant until I put them on my feet and seek out powder. And now we are this assemblage. When it's going right, it's magic. I don't know where I start and stop, and the skis start and stop in the snow. Um, Writing with is that same thing. To engage alphabetically with this experience is to sort of transform or bring these things into kind of an interactive relationship so that new forms of something are coming out. So it's very much the opposite of writing about, where the goal is to figure out what the right answer is. Writing with is to let the body go and see what sorts of new things come out on the other end. I try to show what it looks like in that piece a little bit by narrating that Brett passage where he's dealing with Dawn of Midi. I think that's a fast. I could say lots more about what I do with that in class in a minute if you want. But then I try to show it in the piece through my own narration quickly of a piece of this Stay Home song that I've been so enamored with since the moment we wrote it 30 years ago, and try to allow myself to write with it. What I would say I've learned from that more than anything else is that the fascination over 30 years is very real. It's like this flow state thing, and something about writing with it rather than just experiencing it as a drummer helped me to see it from afar, some sort of meta awareness of this flow state thing, and moreover something I can chase in writing. I never thought that, even after teaching writing for 20 years. I always thought drumming was better. Drumming was a better flow state. It's still pretty amazing, but writing with this kind of thing in this sort of way is it's sort of runs in parallel, but it's just magic. It's just sort of a beautiful thing. So I hope somewhere in there was an answer.
No, that's great. I mean, it definitely cuts against the grain of generally how we think about this Cartesian thing, where to write is an act of the intellect, and the intellect is disembodied from the body. And we're just sort of floating heads. Like, even as professors in front of the classroom, we like, it doesn't matter. Like, we're wearing clothes. We have to wear clothes, but it doesn't matter. What matters is our flapping heads in the middle of the
Right,
classroom, sort of thing. Like, that's how it goes, right? So it's always almost, it feels like it used to feel like a radical shift to sort of like walk around the classroom and be
right.
a sort of human presence in different ways. What you were saying deeply reminds me of Merleau-Ponty's stuff when he's sort of talking about like the organ, and becoming one with it in different ways. Um, and I mean, I guess I also, there's so much to sort of like go over here. I was just kind of curious, if before we sort of move on, to more of the argument, if you wouldn't mind talking about, the ways in which your band, like, one of these milestones was this reunion, and to have a reunion means, you've had a career, or,
Right.
you have a fan base, and you're
Usually, yes, yes, usually
yeah,
true.
that's
Right.
generally what it means, unless, you're playing in a bar and it's a reunion with, like, your friends or whatever it would be. But, so your music and your band has had a really interesting sort of career and life form without you guys being there, sort of thing, and it's a very unique situation, and you describe it as also rhetorical circulation. And there was some, like, there was like this funny moment where you're like, well, academics in my field would call it rhetorical circulation, but really it's, just a bunch of people like digging it and finding it and it has something to say and it resonates still, right? So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind saying something about rhetorical circulation and how that works with sort of like Gen Z or underground scenes, keeping your music sort of alive in different ways.
Yeah. First, the history part. So we make this record in 1999. I'm in my second year of graduate school. The guys are just graduating with their BA degrees. We're in Champaign, Urbana, Illinois. They leave. They're graduated. They want to go home and start life, right? One guy starts working in business, Steve. Mike starts a solo career, get married, have kids, all that stuff. Keep in the most basic of touch for about 15 years, or maybe about 13 years. Hey, how you doing? Holmes and I were talked a little bit more often. Mike and I would say hi maybe every 3 years, right? In some way, shape, or form. Hey, I heard your daughter was born. That sort of thing. Um, the entire time that record is circulating via LimeWire and probably even more so via CD burning. The number of people, including Garzone and Corey in our touring band now, they got the record through CD burning stuff. So we're at the very early stages of the internet. CD burning obviously becomes the first sort of technology where it was like tapes, but better. Then we moved to Napster and LimeWire and that sort of stuff. This record, from a new materialist perspective, is doing things on its own. Now, I say that and I never fully buy it because people are doing things. People are trading tapes. People are engaging these technologies, of course. Nonetheless, something about the way in which these songs are moving around in the world, and there is some truth to that. There's something about the way in which the songs themselves are moving via these technologies and via these sorts of people. I also contend that a huge reason this circulated the way that it did is because we did not exist. Something about the anonymity. If people were drawn for whatever reason to the sounds, we were not there to disavow them of whatever beliefs they wanted to entertain about those sounds. And you just started asking about Gen Z. We were not there to get in the way of their memeing the cover. We were not there in the way to yell at them for taking the first snippet of Never Meant and making pratfall videos or whatever the hell they do. That is where circulation becomes even more interesting, and because people are doing stuff, but when a meme or whatever goes viral, it's people initiate that process, but they don't control it. And so the history of this band and this record is very much about being in the right place at the right time, doing all the wrong things, but being at the right time, letting CD burning culture, Napster culture do its thing, watching meme culture sort of do a thing, or in our case, ignoring it entirely. I was oblivious to this. I swear to you, two students in 10 years say something about the band. And both times I was like, what are you talking about? How do you know about that band? All of this leads to this reunion of a band that we played probably a dozen shows in the early 90s. But by 2014, that song had become Neverment had become enough of a thing, and then that whole sort of first record had become enough of a thing that people wanted to see it. The Disturbed had a similar phenomenon. They were much bigger to start with, but they came back around that time for those reasons, evidently. People wanted to hear that first record. Sunny Day Real Estates had a similar kind of thing where they didn't quite disappear, and they were obviously had a much better career to start with. But around 2014, 2015, something about that tide of uh, whatever Napster circulation culture plus memes brought a bunch of bands back, and we just happened to be in that first wave of that stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's why it's such an interesting story because it's sort of like not just a story about people, but the ways in which people and things circulate and the different stories that are used to keep things alive, right? So, like, I teach a Western art music class randomly as well. And it's sort of like, um, Beethoven didn't expect his music to be used in a Tide Pod commercial. Like, you know what I mean? Like, things sort of exist, but no one expected, like, I don't know, like, Beethoven's Fifth, like, I've got a stain. Like, no one sort of expected that to be a thing. Like, Beethoven be like, you guys do laundry without I don't know, whatever they did, like a sort of, I don't know, without like
Yeah,
going to
lie
the
in a
river or
brush. You wear
something,
like a
like
stick or something. God only knows. Yeah,
exactly, like, yeah, I don't know much about laundry during Beethoven's day, you know? I just sort of know about the wigs and whatnot, but not too much about
yeah.
the laundry. But anyway, that's sort of what I mean. When something exists, it's sort of you're not sure what it'll be doing. And I think you brought out a crucial point. I think one of the biggest issues with sort of new materialism, I haven't thought about this in a while, but it's like object-oriented ontology and it decenters human agency and whatnot, and that's cool, but sort of like, okay, like, your fan isn't your fan or, I mean, by fan, I mean like, an actual fan in your
Yeah,
room, like this
yeah,
fan, right?
yeah, yeah.
It's sort of like not gonna like go and listen to music or something, like, you know what I mean? So you need people to do stuff, I think, still, and, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, especially, like I mean, I see why it exists and whatnot and what it's doing, but at the same time, I think it might mystify and obscure certain things as well. Um, so I was wondering if, you could say a little bit about, I guess, the particular aspects of, the sort of scene, I guess, and then compare them to sort of today's scene, what that even might mean, because there are multiple scenes insofar as I don't just mean places and continents and the places you perform, etcetera, but I mean, like, X or Twitter or what have you, or TikTok. These are all new instantiations of a scene. So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind talking about the various scenes that
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question, and there's so much to say. What I love about, I wrote a piece recently that'll be included in sort of like a trade book collection on Midwest music, in the mid and late '90s. What I can say about that original scene, and as we were talking about earlier, it was predominantly, kind of young white male guys, right? Cis hetero guys. It was also, though, we were in a cheap college town in houses. I wrote this essay about the American football house, which has sort of been reinvented as this nexus of something. I had no relationship to that house at all. I took one picture in front of it one time. Chris Strong, the photographer, lived there. Mike and Steve went to one party in the backyard or something. And now, though, folks have written that themselves into that house, um, for very interesting sorts of reasons. But what that's interesting in and of itself. But to me, that scene more than anything else was a set of neighborhoods in Urbana where it was just nothing but college kids and bands. And I would get kicked out of one band and I would go two houses down and start playing drums with the next band 3 weeks later. And then I get kicked out again and then march a mile away. That scene, and that gave the biggest bands for me at that time were indie bands. Hum came from that world. I saw Hum probably 30 times at different points in Champaign, and my students now love Hum and they can't believe it. Like, you did what? They played every whatever once a month on Tuesday at the Blind Pig. Was kind of like they were the best band on the planet. Poster Children was another huge band down there. They were signed to a major, but they had an enormous influence on that scene. There was that kind of indie music. There was a band called Mother that turned into a band called Menthol. There was a band called Castor. Polyvinyl just re-released their second record. They were a great band, kind of indie guitar rock band. There was a band called Sarge, fronted by a woman named Elizabeth Elmore, that was doing kind of poppier stuff. Angie Heaton, unfortunately, who has since passed away, was doing some fun indie stuff. Then there were the emo bands, like I was friendly with Braid, who's still kind of a sort of foundational second wave emo band. I chased them around, was their roadie for a while, played trumpet with them. All of that stuff was the scene. It was house parties, practices. Everybody lived in this really cheap, within 2 miles of each other, say 2 square miles, in this really cheap space. My college kids don't have that anymore. There are not those cheap places, at least not anywhere out here in the West, and sure as hell not, back home in Chicago. Um, Now the scenes are different. I'm so proud of many of my Boulder students are involved in house party scenes. It seems like in the last 4 or 5 years, they're trying to embrace their own version of that face-to-face house parties all the time. Have a scene, support your friends, have them support you. We transpose to, or we transduce over to Instagram as a scene, or Spotify as a scene, where the scale is different, the numbers are different. One of the things I tell my undergrads all the time, you sold 257 inches, you were doing something, right? You got 250 bodies to pay money and carry around your little CD. 250 plays by the time you hit enter, right, on the keyboard in a Spotify world, you see 250 plays. It's the numbers are different. And so these scenes are global. These scenes involve some of the kinds of circulations that we were talking about before. So there's a way in which it's not even comparable. There are also ways in which, though, there's, some artists stream a whole bunch and can't put butts in seats at concerts. Some people can put lots of butts in seats in concerts and don't stream so much. And so there is an interesting way in which the real world, that is to say, if you take seriously live performance, say, and the world of streaming sometimes run in parallel, sometimes run at odds with one another. So I hope that at least gets the conversation started.
Yeah, no, very much so. There's a few different famous kind of college scenes that have been happening for a while. Like Rutgers, New Brunswick, the underground basement scene is pretty sort of prominent and famous. And there's even academic scholarship on it. And I've had different students do sort of projects on it, interview
And that's
people.
the one that gave birth to Thursday and MCR and those kinds of bands, right? That's that New Brunswick scene.
Yeah, great. Okay, represent because I'm out
Yeah.
in Jersey, so that's great.
Okay. And I don't
Um,
that felt like a different world from us. I felt like the Midwest thing, like Cat and Jazz and the Chicago stuff that was also rooted in post rock. They were cousins. I had heard of that stuff, but I didn't like the Jersey scene, man. I was just reading a history of emo very recently to get ready for this conference. And hardcore, that sounds like those people were just beating the hell out of each other all the time. Like, it scares me even now. Like I think we were much gentler in the Chicago scene. I don't remember anybody getting the shit kicked out of them on a regular basis.
Yeah, I was covering for one bass player at one point, and it was sort of like I was scared to go there because they said that if our band wasn't like hardcore enough, whatever that sort of means, that they're going to beat us. So, like, looking back on it, it's just this, I don't even know, this masculine sort of hellhole in different ways, right? So, I I subverted that in my own weird way. I was, like, in this hardcore band wearing, like, a very flamboyant, like, rainbow sweater, like, playing breakdowns, like, goofing around, but then ultimately after that fled because I was like, "I don't want this other band to beat me up."
And now we're talking. I guess that's a kind of critical punk, right? This kind of like, hey, here's this ethos of whatever, and you're gonna try to take the piss out of it a little bit. And I don't know much about My Chemical Romance except that the student in the paper that you read, she's in that deep into that band. But noticing or looking at this history and realizing that they came from that scene and they actively tried to subvert it, including through their embodiment, right? Including through sort of the way they made themselves up and wore makeup and sort of did the whole kind of like gothy eyeliner thing as a direct critique, and were you know actively sort of against homophobia and actively sort of inviting women up to the front and saying, "Hey, we're not going to put up with this kind of stuff here." That's it. It strikes me that they were critically punk too, in a certain kind of way. Like that was part of their whole ethos. And again, I'm brand new to that music, which is weird. But when I checked out in 2003 or whatever, the last thing I was listening to was emo. So I missed that entire third wave. It's like it might as well be the moon for me. And so, I'm the last person on earth who should be talking about any of this in a way, because I just ignored like 15 years of the history of this music until it sort of jumped back in my lap.
Well, that's the thing about discourse. We unfortunately can't say it all. Even if we
That's right. That's right.
might know more than we say, there's always
That's right.
more, there's always things left unsaid. Um, and so, we talked sort of about like some of the various kind of theoretical concepts you talk about. There's musical mattering that we haven't talked about, and interaction. Now, these two things work very complementary together. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind saying something with about these two concepts, musical mattering and interaction, and how they work. And then ultimately, we'll turn towards this writing technique and what could be done, what could be said, and ultimately something like why this helps, why this matters. We could use that mattering in the pun sense here as well.
Sounds great. So I'm going to start with interaction. So I am not a Barad expert, but I'm deeply Barad is trained as a particle physicist. She has that PhD, and then she has a cultural studies PhD. And so she talks for her interaction has to do with the ways in which bodies that would appear to be discrete from one another come into some sort of relationship that exceeds the sum of their parts and is transformative in the process. She talks, for instance, about the old conundrum in physics of is light a wave or a particle? Well, the answer is yes. And the answer is yes, depending on the means by which one chooses to measure light in a particular situation. So in that case, the physical phenomenon and then the decision, which is both discursive and intellectual and also material, to use a particular measuring tool interacts to quite literally bring forth light as a wave or light as a particle. Now, I don't want to dig too deep into this wormhole because I'll reveal real quickly how little I remember of my physics training from dropping out of engineering school after my first year. I'm going to use an example that I've been working a lot more with recently, notebooking in my field. All right. And so notebooking is is a kind of rhythmic writing about the rhythms of everyday life. And what that means are sort of patterns, predictable sorts of patterns. They could be social, they could be biological, they could be spiritual. I got into all this because I was on the road with American football in 2015. I'm trying to do my professor job, and I'm just like, I'm used to sleep. We also had little kids at home. I'm used to sleep, routine, and having somebody tell me what to do. And instead, I haven't slept in 3 days, and I'm on some fucking bus somewhere. Where am I? I'm going to start keeping a notebook to stay sane so that I can actually get my work done. And what I would notebook constantly is the rhythms of this are nuts. I haven't slept. I feel like shit. I'm playing badly or I'm playing well or whatever. But over time, it's like, oh, I can't wait to notebook. This is fantastic. The notebook as a process, right? So there's the physical thing. This is what's magic about writing. Writing is a process. Alphabetic writing initiates a process of thinking, but also immediately generates a record of that thinking that you can jump right back into and do it again. Notebooking was at first a sort of like save myself, I'm going nuts practice, but soon it was like, oh my God, choosing to write rhythmically, deliberately, even about mundane things, brings all of these different little rhythmic pieces into a space. And sometimes they interact with one another. Like, oh my God, this fatigue reminds me of something I was trying to understand about the body without organs. Been slogging through, I slogged through that book 3 times on the L in Chicago. Like I was there. So, I'm not even pretend that I understand. Nonetheless, like, oh, my fatigue and the body without organs, and oh my God, flow state on stage last night. I was sweating just the right amount. I could hear through my monitors. The mix was good. I was drinking at that time. I had a couple drinks. I was in the zone. I don't drink anymore. The notebook is bringing all of these different rhythms into interaction. And when it works, it is like an assemblage. The things that seem like they're distinct morph into something else just for a few moments. And those moments of insight are what I call in my other work resonance, right? So you've got all these rhythms, and all of a sudden you've got one rhythm from one body either generating a rhythm in another body, and then they're intensifying, and that waveform is going up and up. Sometimes it even transforms into something brand new. That's how I understand Barad on interaction. Now I'll get to the mattering stuff. Small, and here I was so proud of myself. I'm like, I'm going to a musicology conference. I'm going to talk about small. It's like, it's like talking about the dictionary in an English class or something. Except that I still think small is quite profound. Musicking is a process. It's an active recognition that music is a verb. And by engaging in that process, you are also always building community. And I highlight this ideal community passage. I think that's a profound passage. To music is to imagine an ideal version of oneself in the world. I don't think that's trivial at all. I think we need to be saying that constantly. I think this writing with stuff is a particular kind of musicking. I think it unlocks, through what we were talking about before, a particular kind of like opened body that allows for potentially new things. And I don't think you necessarily get that any other way. I think alphabetic text activating these thought processes and then generating this record is potentially unique. Now, there must be some limit to this. I don't know. The mattering thing, though, is like when you start to music in that way, you are potentially bringing new things. Mattering is the interactive process whereby the universe comes to be. When discourse and material things and energies interact, that's mattering. But the pun is also very real. To matter is also to be aware of an ethic. We want to matter in ways that make the world more vibrant, more alive, more open to new kinds of healthy mattering. To be unethical in your mattering is to close down, to negate, to marginalize, or otherwise take life's processes and inhibit them in some way. And I think that's a fascinating way to understand this ethic. Our job is to an ethical musical mattering says be open to whatever it is this experience dictates as it unfolds. Be honest about it in your writing and be honest about both what it does for you and its limitations, this critical sort of thing. So, like, define who you are in the process, put it against a backdrop, and then synthesize. If you don't like, when when I would listen to Miles and I would feel this flow state, and then I would read that he's getting his ass kicked in front of this club, dissonance. Who am I? Why am I not getting beat up in my neighborhood? And my favorite artist on the planet is now. That's a kind of ethic that comes from some version of musical mattering. I hope that answered. I don't know. I hope that answers some questions.
No, that's great. And of course, always great to bring back sort of Miles and thinking through various forms of sort of privilege that are bestowed upon different forms of bodies and in different locations. The Christopher Small stuff, definitely sort of not trivial in any way, pointing at the utopian possibilities that could happen, sort of thing. It reminds me of, the Jacques Attali thing that like music can herald in the future, sort of stuff. It points at what could be, and this reminds me of sort of emo nostalgia insofar as emo nostalgia looks at the past not to reclaim or create that past, but look at sort of how this past could form and could have formed a new present. And I thought that was very sort of profound because you're not sort of trying to stay within the past.
Can
You're
I
you
can I say too? Atali uses composition. God, I read Atali a couple of different times, including recently. It's that book is terrifyingly accurate about the DSPs. Terrifyingly accurate. We get to this copy phase, and the DSPs, the Spotify's of the world, have made music quote unquote free. He uses the phrase, and again, Masumi translates. So I assume Masumi is using this term composition. I don't speak French, so I don't know if there would be other ways to use it. But as a composition person, I love that he ends with composition because what he says is that now that music is free, it's heralding this sort of utopic potential to compose whatever the hell you want, including yourself. And it is a very sort of body without organs moment. I think there is maybe some little hint of that in the stuff that I'm trying to peddle in this article. If looking back is for me, I'm looking back at something that I love so much, but I want to know why I continue to be enamored with it. And I'm making a joke in this keynote. Like, it's not about action figures and packages, that there's that kind of nostalgia. That's always weirded me out a little bit. I get it. But like, the only reason to do any of this is to keep doing it. It's because inhabiting these songs in the moment is utopic. It points to, as in a shitty world like ours, full of all sorts of horrible marginalizations and horrible violences, when music invites all of us to imagine something better. And when I get to travel the world and meet amazing people in Indonesia and in the Philippines, we're going to China and Japan this summer, like, to imagine just for a second that something that I've helped to sort of initiate years ago is meaningful to a 19-year-old in Shanghai. That is so profoundly humbling. And I just, if we're gonna if we're gonna fix ourselves, we're gonna fix ourselves through that sort of energy or through that sort of mattering because something's going on and it has nothing to do with what we in American football did, other than we got to plug into this cool whatever the hell this is, and we've been lucky enough to sort of continue to be able to you know throw our tiny little grains of sand into whatever this thing is. Oh God, this stuff seems so incredibly powerful, and I somehow Atali just seems it's so it's one of my favorite things I've ever read. And it's an insane book. It's so insane, but the end is just like God, how he figured this out in '77 or whenever he wrote that book. It's astonishing. There must be some bigger oneness that we're all a part of that reveals itself to us in little pieces, including through this thing we call music, I would say.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And in the introduction of the sort of new piece of Ateli's noise, it's sort of like Frederick Jamerson says that this is the revival of sort of dialectics and dialectical thought within historians as well. So yeah, incredibly prophetic book. It's interesting, sort of you talked about Miles Davis a few times. You sort of bring up kind of what seems to be something like the museumification of things where you have things in their original packaging and whatnot. And Miles Davis's whole thing was sort of like always going and moving and not looking back, and kind of always getting with the young people and thinking about what younger musicians are up to. And it's funny because a lot of your fans and whatnot, and people that have been interested in your music and whatnot, are Gen Z. So there's this like Miles Davis thing going on a little bit, perhaps as well.
Man,
Um,
that's the most flattering thing you could say to me, but it is wild to think that somehow this music is useful to kids, and the kids of the age that you teach and the age that I teach, and it is one of the more gratifying pieces of this. And I don't even want to for a second pretend to compare what we're doing with somebody like Miles, except in this, Miles always struck me as authentic to the core, even warts and all. And there's some aspects of Miles' behavior that are horrific, frankly, right? In terms of misogyny and things. I grapple all the time with what does it mean to love the man and the music, but also to acknowledge this sort of horrific behavior. I think emo is, if nothing else, in its best forms, authentic. That sometimes trumps one's ability to play or one's ability to whatever, do this, that, and the other in tune or in time or any of that. But authenticity is central. And I think there is some sort of connection. I think all good music is ultimately authentic. I hope that's part of why this music is potentially attractive to Gen Z and a younger generation. I think kids, especially having grown up on the internet and scrolling and things, are thirsty for authenticity. I'm thirsty for authenticity. I just went to an AI symposium. I'm sure you go to these too. I'm just like soul crushing. I am now adamant I would rather have papers with errors in them, because I know that that student is, I know that there's a human communication being attempted rather than algorithms spitting out something that approximates this sort of ghost of of human presence. So authenticity is the whole game. And so in that sense, like God, we're all chasing after it. And I feel like the Gen Z kids in particular, having grown up with inauthenticity masquerading as their sort of entire social being, I feel for them. I think we've done them a disservice, we people who are older than they are, and God bless them for wanting to feel and to feel the body without organ stuff, like to feel and not like not feel bad about feeling or something.
Yeah, that's great. And emo music in particular gives a space for sort of like men, perhaps, like historically men, to feel things they're not supposed to or allowed to feel and whatnot. And of course, there's lots of female emo artists as well that I have everyone explore too. But sort of historically, it's like men have had to suppress feelings and whatnot. So it creates this interesting space. But then, of course, there are papers that talk about the misogyny within emo lyrics and whatnot too, which is a big thing. And yeah, definitely with Miles, he's definitely like this confusing, problematic in character. Like specifically, like the text "Mad at Miles" kind of talks about him beating women and stuff like this, and the role the police played within homophobia and all of these other things. But In terms of sort of the idea of kind of quote unquote using the music in different ways for emotional catharsis, or sort of reflection or a reflection point, you offer this idea, sonico musical experience, and sort of this is again bridging the writing with and the creation of an intra sort of communal space where now when you're listening to music, you're reflecting and you're writing and whatnot, but you're doing it while you're alone. You're not necessarily alone because you're doing it within a space, within a community. For instance, your student Star does that sort of thing. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you mean by sonico musical writing, and what that can offer.
The reason I coined that term from my perspective has to do with the discourse in my field. That is to say, much of what I read of contemporary rhetorical scholarship and also compositional scholarship is focused on sonic rhetoric, on the ways in which sounds and vibrations, which includes music, of course, um, persuades us at an embodied, a sort of subtle embodied level. Um, there are good reasons why rhetoricians take that tack as opposed to musical persuasion, because rhe- rhetorical studies and also composition studies has had to, in some ways, divorce itself materially from the study of aesthetics, because that's what English departments do, or that's what whatever communication department, not communication, English departments do, or comp lit departments, whatever. I am so deeply interested, though, in music-based persuasion, or the ways, maybe more precisely, the ways in which musics provide us with affects that are undeniable and are not just reducible to are you persuaded or not. And that's a caricature of what sonic rhetoric is. I know that. But I can't divorce in my own brain just the deep love that I have anytime I meet any music nerd. It's always the same. We're not talking about whether we're being persuaded by the political message of Rage Against the Machine. Is that fucking groove is awesome. Also, De La Roca is awesome. And all of it together is fucking awesome. And oh, by the way, I love their politics and I'm totally going to follow whatever. You know what I mean? Like, Sonico musical for me is a way of acknowledging the sonic rhetoric community and its importance to this, but also insisting that there's an aesthetic, this deep attraction to something. Star is nuts for My Chemical Romance and some other bands. Um, she's nuts for them in a way that I don't think she would ever. I don't want to speak for her, but my sense is her deep sort of need to feel that music is attached to the deep need that she has to connect and reconnect with family and deal with some of the traumas that she's recounting in this particular story. When I gotta know why this drumming feels so amazing to me for all these years. I'm dying to know about it. And there's some sort of aesthetic pull, including the idea that I'll never really know about it. I've got to get all of that in there. When this class routinely, I've probably taught 6 semesters of this now, something like that, or maybe no, actually, no, that's BS. I think I might be on semester 12, actually. So, like, I've been doing it on and off for 5 or 6 years. It's the single best class I teach, or I get the best student writing out of this class, and it's because I think they are dying. Most of them are non-music majors. Most don't speak a word of theory. They're deeply interested in what Brett does. There's also a rhetorician named Sarah Elizabeth Adams who has this kind of, I can send this to you if you want, these long narrations of how Steve Reich's It's Gonna Rain feels, like this kind of weird disorientation. My students will abide this writing with practice with their own favorite song. Phoebe Bridgers is huge. I've had many, many wonderful papers on Phoebe Bridgers. Um, Here's how and why her music feels in my physical frame. Here's how it brings me back to COVID. She clearly was the soundtrack to COVID for like 80% of my students. And now, though, I'm going to make an argument as to why someone else should care about the feel of this song and the way in which it brings me back to the COVID space. Students will take that with warrants about like, let's not dismiss Gen Z as being, sort of too soft or too whatever, right? These were the physical circumstances under which we came of age. Let's be quite clear about the sort of masculinist um, nature of some of these critiques of sort of Gen Z, right? That they're not tough enough or whatever. Like students writing with this stuff, they're passionate. I get the least amount of AI sort of fakery in this class, especially compared to my other classes. Um, I think they're dying to engage the musico aspect, which is also the sonic, but like this, Robinson speaks of pulsional incidents, stealing from Bart. Um, Pulsional incidents, the stuff that burrows in your physical frame, the affects that are so deep that they drive you regardless. They could be positive, they could be negative, they could. This is all about pulsional incidents, and I think for those of us who speak and need music, it is out. It is the pulsional incident set of pulsional incidents for us, and that's why we gotta dig into it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it reminds me of a lot of there's this sort of turn, I feel like, almost to sort of like music and healing, both sort of psychological and physical, in different ways. And there's always been an interest in sort of music and mysticism. And I think a lot of people are just kind of like, uh, well, how does this work? So I don't think too many students would be really interested in sort of seeing what a robot has to say about their favorite song. I think they'd actually rather write about their favorite song. So I think we cracked the code in terms of like students won't cheat if they're interested in something or if they're really invested or something like this. Um,
Yeah, and as a teacher yourself, you think you crack one code, and then there's a bunch more codes that behind that safe are 10 more saves and 38 more Russian dolls. Nonetheless, I think this is exactly correct, and I think if we have what I think is so important about this, and that there's a part of me that thinks that this musical mattering stuff is there's a unique version in emo because the emo aesthetic is open has been traditionally open to this. And I think too it's hyper pop instantiation. So I would say hyper pop is sort of an evolution of emo. And I've had a number of students school me profoundly on the ways in which hyper pop is also sort of a trans genre. It's a deeply queer but also trans genre. This sort of radical re-embodiment or even disembodiment is sort of like an extension of emo culture, but also radical acceptance of whoever you are, however you identify, you are loved here, you are essential to the kind of like over the top aesthetic. Man, if we got to get students thinking about this. We got to get students thinking about the things that they give a shit about because these are authentic things. These are things that they're presented with. And by the way, we can get them to challenge themselves and you know uh look at themselves in the mirror and decide maybe the scene isn't so great, right? There's a Cameron McDonald piece in a pretty recent Journal of Pop Music Studies about 100 gecs. I do not like 100 gecs, and I don't mean that in any sort of like it's like their aesthetic is just not one that appeals to me. I respect the hell out of them though, because they help to bring forth this kind of radically sort of like absurdist genre, and it speaks to so many of my students. So I cannot necessarily like music but appreciate the hell out of the artist and the aesthetic and the move. But the Cameron McDonald piece is quite clear. Look, this music is radically, this kind of hyperpop is sort of radically embodied and deeply challenging. It comes from the same suburbs that I came from. They're from Des Plaines. I'm from Arlington Heights and Buffalo Grove. It is generally sort of a white suburban culture, at least stereotypically, and there is work to be done to make sure that hyperpop embodiment is as representative as it needs to be. In the same way that Williams and Sabani are talking about how we need to be critically interrogate emo so that it is as representative and welcoming as it needs to be. So to love something is also to acknowledge that maybe you got to play a part in changing it.
yeah, couldn't agree more. I think always to love is to critique because it means you care enough to want it to be the best it could possibly be, that sort of thing.
And this is this ethical mattering thing, right? Like if you're committed to maximal, everybody's doing exactly what they want to do, what their dream is, then we have to make some changes in the world to let more people give more people more access to that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for saying all those sorts of things. Now, I was kind of curious if you wouldn't mind sharing what is the process of sonico-musical sort of writing and experience? How do you go about it? I know you mentioned notebooking. I know you have other pieces on notebooking. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind saying something about what notebooking, the actual process is, and also what sort of you have your students do in terms of, laying out this writing with process, because it seems to be very actually systematic.
Yeah, I'll try to address them in that order. And so notebooking is the easiest place to start because notebooking is a commitment to a process. And the process is I will write in some sort of periodic way, pick a time for 10 minutes, for 20 minutes until I'm done. I commit to doing that on a regular basis, no matter what. And I commit to the idea that any sort of rhythm that catches my attention is fair game. The new materialist notebook people in my field, people like Casey Boyle, say that the process itself transduces these different rhythms into sort of more resonant arrangements. The humanists in my notebookers in my world are like, no, 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 these are habits of mind. These are practices that individuals commit to. Marilyn Cooper talks about observation, connection, and wonder as the three operative habits. Beautiful. You commit to looking, you commit to bringing those lookings together, and you commit to a kind of wonder as a kind of fuel for like, where could this lead me? So, so that's notebooking. I talk some semesters I talk to students about that, some not. The actual writing with thing, the course is built around three major assignments. The first one is in the vein of that Brett piece that I reference here quickly, and in the vein of my own narration of Stay Home. Choose a song, maybe 30 seconds to 2 minutes, or other kind of unfolding sonic experience. I've had students do this with white noise machines, with thunderstorms, recordings of thunderstorms. So these can be sounds too. But pick 30 seconds to 2 minutes and narrate that 30 seconds to 2 minutes by listening to it 5 or 6 times, jotting down whatever comes to mind across those 5 or 6 times and compiling into a sort of a single transcript and then trying to timestamp that transcript. From that practice, now write about what you have written in some sort of flowier, more prose-oriented way and try to make an argument to a particular audience, not you, about why they should care about this. So that's assignment one. Second assignment is narrate some sort of experience, either unfolding or in this case, it could have already happened, but narrate the ways in which the feel of this experience connects you, puts you in community with other people. So the first one is very much about your own experience. The second one is take that, now place it into a larger communal space. The last final project, which is where they are in the semester right now, ideally take either the first or second essay, do research in your field. This is a writing across the curriculum idea or the writing in the disciplines idea. Make your embodied uh, sonical musical experience legible or interesting to someone in your future, in your discipline, in your future career, or if you hate what you're doing, your heartfelt avocation, right? And so that is the writing with process across a semester. Consistently sort of rooted in the body, but the audiences are broadening out further and further. Um, the narration of the Stay Home piece that is featured in the Journal of Pop Music Studies piece was me trying to do my own assignment. And what was hard about it is if in that piece I talk about this transcript and comment thing. First of all, I was like, I want to, I can't write when I'm playing, so what the hell am I going to do? I tried generating that transcript and it was choppy and awful. I'm like, oh, I can't even do my own assignment. What is this? So I generated the transcript part, time stamped it, and then deliberately said, I'm going to put the music on again. And now I'm just going to almost free write, but with that in front of me. And that, I think the subsequent sort of passages of analysis feel the closest to like Adams or Robinson for me. And those were the places where I started to like, there's a whole bit about like KC style, like leaning back and like a certain kind of like trad grip hit or whatever. Like I would have never articulated that had I not tried to do my own assignment. And I can't wait to do more of it. I love doing this stuff now. So I think this writing with thing is a way I do it for fun. Sometimes I do it as a way to get out of like writer's block kinds of situations. I do it when I'm really stressed, like I'm trying to get this keynote together, like I just got to do whatever. So notebooking is the kind of easiest example. I think the course is a little bit more scaffolded version. And then I think my example was me trying to do it. And then she does some of that writing with, but she really focuses on community in a way that just like sort of blew my mind. Like I was so focused on myself and what I was trying to do. And she almost immediately turns to my sister, my mom, my grandma. And I feel like I learned so much from how she engaged that nostalgic music and how fundamentally connected to other people it made her. Um, so I learned a bunch from the kindness that she showed me and letting me use that piece because there's a whole IRB thing that we had to jump through together. And she's absolutely thrilled to do it, and I think it makes for a better piece.
Yeah, of course. It's always great to use actual student sort of examples, which I find happening a lot, like in like the Nancy Summer sort of pieces and all of these other
D
things.
I was gonna say, what I was hoping it's common to do this in rec comp. Is it common in musicology or ethnomusicology to do this kind of thing as well?
Not necessarily students, but your interlocutors and who you're interviewing. Like, I've seen people sort of like quote YouTube comments and even sort of like
Gotcha,
Instagram posts. I saw one
gotcha.
really bold move where someone actually was like, "This was on Wikipedia at this date at this
Yeah,
time."
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Gotcha, gotcha,
but not necessarily so much bringing student writing in, unless you're sort of unless that's like part of your project directly. Yeah.
gotcha, gotcha. And that's kind of we are a praxis-oriented field, and that's one of the things that I love the most about it is I do think that we tend to take writing, including student writing, as seriously as we can. And I think that student learning, our theories are also ways to try to engage students in authentic sort of learning so that they maximize their opportunities to, to make the world anew in their own image rather than, you know, feel inauthentic in some of the ways we were talking about before.
Yeah, that's great. I think a lot of the articles coming out of, like, the radical educator or whatever it's called, radical teacher, something like that, do
There's
that
one
sort of
called
thing.
Radical Teacher, and pedagogy can be that way too. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 exactly, that's what I was thinking, where they bring in sort of students and have agency for the students and whatnot. Now, I thought it was particularly interesting what you just talked about was inadvertently, it seemed like a form of music criticism when you were sort of, like, learning about your own sort of thing. It felt like a form of practice as well, sort of like hearing what you do and hearing what you go for, and then also hearing yourself within a tradition, the Kansas City tradition that you might not have expected. This sort of behind the beat tension thing and people talking about how that causes the swing or something within jazz.
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
was really interesting, but I wanna I don't know if you wanna say anything about that, but I do know I wanna be respectful of your time, of course, because 'cause I'm very grateful that we're here. So I wanted to end by asking, what is the emo elder?
I don't know how old you are. It's definitely me. So elder emo is this sort of cute term. The first time I ever saw it was there's a piece in Journal Pop Music Studies once again by Annalise Haukus. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing Annalise's name correctly. She identifies herself as an elder emo, and that's one of the pieces that I first encountered. I just sort of did a search for like emo and nostalgia just to see what happened, and it popped up. But I think this elder emo thing is folks who, she identifies elder emos as folks who grew up in the aughts and who did the hot topic thing and are now old enough to look back and understand, like me, right in this piece, like to look back and to sort of see it with two sets of eyes. So she says, and I think she's very smart to say, there's a certain way in which none of this is replicable. Like whatever emo is now is not the same as that. And I have my own version of that. There was 808 California was the sort of house. I remember seeing Lungfish and Lungfish, like the singer, guitarist, and drummer were in the kitchen and the bass player was in the like the back behind the crowd because it was too damn crowded. That's not replicable, right? But the elder emo also understands, I think, that that's not the point. That's nostalgia. That's the action figures and packages stuff. Like if it's like, oh, you weren't there, you couldn't understand. No, every generation sort of has its own challenges, and we invented. I meant to say this earlier. There's this invented nostalgia category when one is nostalgic for a time period that they didn't experience. I had that with Miles, right? I think some of my students have it with a kind of imagined 90s, something like that. Having lived through the 90s, it wasn't that great, but we need to invent things. And I think somebody like an elder emo, or at least as I understand her characterization in that piece, elder emo is smart enough to know that the all of the point of this is to move us forward. And this is a point of connection. If I love that music, if I love MCR and Star loves MCR, then all of a sudden we have this point of connection across 35 years or whatever it is, right? If some kid comes up to me and says, "Oh my gosh, I love LP1," my neighbor, my neighbor is 13, and she doesn't say much. She's friends with my kids a little bit. Her mom called me and said, what she wants for her birthday is a poster of American football. And I'm like, all right, so I brought it, and she's very shy. She's very cute, nice kid. But it was like, oh my God, like how the idea that that kid and me have this connection across this music is that's a sort of elder emo thing too, I guess. Like trying to recognize that we're all doing the same. We all chasing the same thing, which is life, I think. And we're probably smarter not to get hung up on, well, you'd never understand whatever. I don't know. At some point, we all want the same things, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, one point you sort of make within the piece is like, well, these songs are sad, and the songs are sad, and I feel sad, but they're writing this sad thing, which means that we're all kind of sad. So there's a universal sadness, and it's sort of
Yeah.
like you're no longer sad and alone. You could just embrace the sadness of everyone, perhaps, and be within a community of said
A
sadness.
community of sad is still a sad. I joke all the time. No one ever listened to a song to feel worse. Sometimes we like to commiserate together. And some of my favorite music, and I'm guessing yours too, is awfully sad or awfully melancholic or awfully blue. But man, at the end of the day, even knowing DePiro talks about this in their piece, like there's this question he asks in when he analyzes the Soccer Mommy video. They ask like, don't you feel this way too? Like this is the point of the nostalgia is that even in COVID times, like people were isolated, but we're all isolated together through Phoebe Bridgers, and there's something beautiful and sort of life affirming about that.
No, 100%. And I think the reason I wanted to ask about the emo elder thing is because I can't think of maybe there are other musics, but it's sort of a rarity where the people that like grew up with the music are considered like cool and people like look up to them in different ways. Like you're still cool in the eyes of a 13-year-old, and that's kind of amazing.
And I just, I mean, I don't know that. Thank you for saying that. I'm not sure that maybe not, but I just think you think of like Ian MacKaye and people like that, like these or Henry Rollins or some other folks like or fucking Kim Gordon or somebody. Like, God, you're 70 years old and you're making cool stuff. That's what I want to be. One of my favorite current artists is Bill Frisell, right? Just turned 75. I think Bill Frisell is among the most brilliant humans on planet Earth. And I think he's the coolest. And he's been chasing authenticity his entire life. And I think all of us, I would hope that maybe it's an elder emo thing or just like elder musicians, people who are, you see them even at an advanced age and you think, God, they are doing it right. They are chasing the right thing. They embrace the love that is all of this rather than the self-destruction or the star stuff, or as opposed to somebody who looks clearly washed up at 40 or whatever, right? Like their best years are behind them or something. I just want to be with them. Just want to be with the wise ones.
Wonderful, don't we all? And yeah, Bill Frisell is an amazing guitarist, wonderful musician. I got to see him live, so humble brag there. Great to be in the
He's
present.
the best. Oh my god. I will I and every time I just he's somebody it's just like soul affirming. It is really and just to be around people who I saw Gillian Welch and Dave Rawlings, and that was like soul affirming. They're two of my favorite humans on the planet too, and there's something so sort of ancient in what they're doing. Like you just feel like hundreds of years of like Earth. It's like, oh my God, there's like this shit is just real. I don't know.
Well, I'm never really one to quote Nietzsche, but sometimes music without life would be a mistake, right? That sort of thing.
Well done. Well done.
Before we go, is there anything else you wanna say or plug or things you have going on, or where listeners can sort of find you?
Uh, I probably should have answers. So I just want to thank you. What a joyful conversation. This has felt like it's been minutes. I hope I haven't been blathering too much, but it is such a one of the joys in life is to have. I'm so flattered that you read this thing. You took the time to come up with the questions that you came up with, and this was truly like a good conversation is its own kind of interaction. I think I'll be thinking about this for a long time. Um, if people want to come see American football, we're gonna be all over the damn place this summer, so come find us. Um, but also, yeah, I'm just just deeply grateful for a lovely conversation. So thanks, Lee. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for spending time, especially on a Friday, and, I'll have to come out and see a show, definitely.
Let me know anytime. That'd be awesome.
Alright, thank you so much. We'll talk soon, man.